I never anticipated disclosing this, but life has a tendency to immerse you in the. Surprisingly, my name is Elise, and I'm 44 years old. I have been a single mother for several years. I have been raising my son alone for an extended period. His name is Lenny, is now 22 years old. We have been closely assisting each other, one another through the vicissitudes of life. One evening, an unforeseen event occurred. Lenny appeared exceedingly fatigued and stated that he felt unwell due to his strenuous effort and engaged in extensive study while observing. An unforeseen event occurred which I communicated to him. He may recline on my bed for a period. However, if he desired to rest, it is a quiet night in our residence, and it requires it to warm up. I placed a hefty object. Initially, a blanket was placed over him, merely a mother assisting her son. Nonetheless, as I reclined next him, I sensed his presence. Approach nearer. He must have been attempting to get warm, and I did not contemplate it extensively. However, he subsequently encircled her with his arms, him tenderly drawing me near, like he once did to the time he was. In my youth, I was rather taken aback, yet I acquiesced. He likely required solace. Could sense his warmth beside him. As we laid there, I experienced steady breathing. Lenny's respiration slowed as if he were as I succumbed to slumber. The room was enveloped in profound silence. I could hear my own heartbeat, experienced an unusual yet soothing sensation, refrained from movement to avoid disturbing him, convinced myself it was merely a maternal instinct, offered solace to Herson. But eventually he shifted once more. Drawing nearer to me, beneath the cover he sensed his arm encircle, enveloped me more closely, and I became immobile for a time of uncertainty. Regarding one's thoughts, I intended to express something, to create distance. However, another aspect of my being remained motionless. An atmosphere of tension permeated the environment, could not disregard, and I was unaware of the reason. Experienced this sentiment, yet subsequently an event occurred. What occurred astonished me. I experienced a profound sensation. There was something hard beneath the covers, unanticipated, causing my heart to race. I endeavored to maintain composure, to remind myself that he was merely my son. Perhaps he did not. He did not even recognize it himself as I laid there. Endeavoring to disregard the emotions that began to accumulate within me, I expressed. It was merely a fleeting moment, peculiar and uncomfortable time that would eventually subside. However, as the minutes elapsed, I became aware that circumstances were altered, and I was unaware Lenny remained nearby, aware of how to manage the situation. His breathing was steady to me, yet I could perceive the increasing warmth between us, wished to express a statement, humorous, to alleviate the strain. But the words eluded me. I felt ensnared. At that moment, uncertain of my own thoughts, emotions subsequently, Lenny adjusted his position, elevating his. He turned his head to gaze at me. His eyes possessed a Lenny. Shift had not observed softening thereafter, preceded by a gaze that evoked dual sensations within me, simultaneously secure and anxious. Although he remained silent, his stare appeared to inquire whether everything was satisfactory. I attempted to smile in the hope of alleviating the unusual sensation, although it solely resulted in the silence felt profound as Lenny's hand remained still. In my arm, warm, soft, and steady, I could perceive his fingertips delicately gliding, nearly absent. It was a trivial matter, however. Each contact appeared to ignite a passion inside me that I maintained my breathing, consistently striving to conceal from him that my heart was beating, and I was uncertain about what to do. I remained passive, experiencing a sense of emotion. Entirely engrossed in the peculiar, I reassured myself of the link between us. Was merely a woman consoling her son, merely silence accompanied by the two of us beneath the cover, My thoughts continued to revolve on thoughts that appeared incorrect, yet I was unable to reject them. Was not merely sleeping there with him in such proximity. I sensed a profound emotion. I felt a lack of understanding regarding connection. A blend of perplexity and warmth, an unforeseen sensation that immobilized me. Lenny seems oblivious to my difficulties. He remained alongside me, his hand in motion, gently reassuring, as though it were the utmost. The most natural phenomenon in the world is his respiration. He was peaceful. His eyelids closed once more, and I contemplated whether he was succumbing to slumber, although subsequently his hand transitioned, ascending gradually. I felt a cold traverse my arm. He opened his eyes, gazing directly into. There was an inquiry in his look, as if he inquired whether this was acceptable for me. Experienced the identical peculiar attraction that he did. Whispered his name, scarcely able to articulate. I intended to seize this as well. He leaned in closer, then withdrew to establish distance, considerable distance. Although I was unable to, the tension between us was excessive, powerful, like a silent tempest gathering. The stillness prevailed as neither of us uttered a word. The air was saturated with unarticulated expressions, aspects Webb experienced yet could not convey yourself to assert, then nearly as if it was the most instinctive action. As he leaned forward, my heart beat as my mind raced. However, I was unable to restrain myself. I felt conflicted, stuck between my responsibilities, his mother, and peculiar emotions that had emerged as he inclined nearer. I sensed my each breath I took, and every notion I entertained disappeared, leaving solely that instant Lenny's hand nestled softly between us. His fingers now linger on my shoulder. Whether he was also vacillating on the globe? The surroundings were remote, and all I could, the warmth of his presence, was the focal point, the rhythmic pulsation of his heart that I could nearly hear for a moment when I closed. I attempted to soothe myself by speaking to my eyes. I will withdraw to disrupt the intimacy that was perplexing and intense, although I then observed his hand delicately elevate while sweeping aside a lock of hair. Removed from my visage, it was a straightforward yet compassionate gesture. Nevertheless, it caused my heart to ache in ways I could not comprehend, illuminated my perception, and there he was, gazed at me with profound tenderness. His face was so close that I trusted him, could observe every minute detail, freckles adorning the soft contour of his lips, the manner in which his eyes scrutinized mine. His look exhibited a vulnerability that corresponded with my own, and I could perceive that he was equally disoriented in this moment as I was wasted in that suspended state, silent as though time itself had ceased. My mind was a tumult of inquiries, uncertainty around matters I did not comprehend. However, my body remained immobile. I felt compelled. To him, this individual I had nurtured, and yet it was as though I was encountering someone completely unfamiliar. At that time, just when I believed we had been perpetually ensconced in that quiet, Lenny withdrew, slightly disrupting in a stupor, he averted his gaze, seemingly embarrassed, and emitted a tremulous laugh, while massaging the nape of his neck, evoked a recollection of a second, prompting me to recognize the proximity. We had been aware of the extent of our shared experiences abruptly. The burden of it all overwhelmed me, prompting a profound reaction. Breath attempting to stabilize myself against the influx of emotions that appeared to emerge from every facet of my existence, I fervently hoped that he had not. Observe the internal conflict that stirred. Within me, he spoke. "Apologies, mother." His tone gentle and tentative, a hint of doubt articulating his words. I did not intend to create. He averted his sight, which was peculiar. From me, I briefly perceived the tiniest blush tinging his cheeks, indication that he was also contending with the identical tumult of emotions I experienced, fighting to maintain self-control. Frozen sought to console him by conveying a message. that all was well, that this awkwardness did not alter anything. Between us, however, the words eluded expression way. I found myself immobilized, uncertain of how to fracture the silence, and in that fleeting instant, I recognized with acute clarity that I had never experienced a greater sense of dislocation with my automatically stretched out to my own son, hand delicately positioned on his shoulder, anticipating that the modest act would provide him several reassurance. A subtle smile played at the edges of my lips as I endeavored to alleviate. I could sense my own strain, worry permeating my words. "All right, Lenny," I muttered, my voice kind and consistent, in an effort to assure him that it is merely. It has been just the two of us for an extended period, hasn't it? We have acclimated to it, and now it feels it was peculiar, he acknowledged with a nod of comprehension, and a fleeting expression of relief traversed his gaze, as if words had resonated as the atmosphere appeared to brighten. The doorbell sounded, disrupting the delicate silence. Tranquil, we had merely commenced the construction of the piercing clang of the bell startled us both, out of the moment reminding us of the I stood up before the world beyond that door. Swiftly my heart continues to race from the experience, an unusual sensation of appreciation for the disruption as I created. As he approached the door, I became aware of my pulse accelerate, and I was unable to dispel the peculiar residual energy that persisted from the dialogue with Lenny upon my arrival. Upon opening the door, I encountered our neighbor Mark. He was positioned on the opposite side, smiling, his recognizable visage presenting an immediate sensation of solace. Yet his gaze remained on me for a moment, prolonged as though in pursuit of an underlying element. I swiftly composed myself, anticipating the residual tension from the preceding moment would not be evident to him. "Greetings, Elise." Mark greeted Elise warmly, his voice resonating with warmth. "As amiable and affable as ever. I intended to visit and ascertain your status. Required anything? I am aware it has been progressing. It has been somewhat colder recently, and I am able to assist with any heating problems you may have experienced issues." His consideration was an unanticipated sense of relief. A surge of thankfulness enveloped me. For a fleeting instant, I permitted myself to embrace the feeling of solace in Mark's presence, alleviate their traces of universal gratitude. I say to you, Mark, while offering him a smile, was somewhat more authentic today. In fact, the residence tends to become somewhat cold, particularly during the night. I would genuinely thank you for your assistance. Mark entered. His footfall were firm and comforting. I immediately sensed Lenny's gaze upon us. I could perceive from the periphery of my vision. His facial expression is difficult to interpret, yet the manner in which he observed manufactured in the United States. My stomach tightened momentarily. Could have swore I observed something resembling jealousy in his gaze, although he swiftly concealed in his features, reverting to the gaze captured, their customary apathy, caught me unprepared, leaving me with a sense of unease. Perceived that Lenny might be experiencing something more intricate than I possessed. Understood when Mark navigated the living space. Inspecting the heater, he minimized its size. Inquire about the circumstances that had transpired at home and my management of all responsibilities. His voice was effervescent, and his presence was providing solace in a manner previously unexperienced, anticipated, although my focus persistently returned to Lenny, who stood silently in place, the hallway observing us silently, the passion that permeated the air between us. Experience an unarticulated tension. The atmosphere in the room had imperceptibly altered. I found myself conflicted between want to ensure Mark feels welcomed and to attempt to alleviate the anguish I perceived constructing. And Lenny. It appeared as if the two of them were discreetly vying for. I lacked awareness on how to attract attention. Maneuver across the intricate interval between then. I observed Lenny once again, and in a transient moment, I observed something glimmer. In his gaze, there was something that intrigued Madame. If he were grappling with emotions he had not disclosed to me prior to my ability to, Mark turned to me to clarify it. Facial expression, transforming into a broad smile. Everything appears satisfactory here. Elise. He stated, his tone pleasant, to simply call if you need. Require further assistance. I expressed my gratitude to Lenny as he departed. Upon exiting, I could nearly perceive the tension between Lenny and me intensifies, densifying the atmosphere in a manner that rendered everything appears more complex. I softly shut the door behind me and turned to discover Lenny motionless. In the hallway, his arms were crossed. Securely over his chest, his look was stern and unrelenting. There was an element in his posture that conveyed, "It is evident that whatever transpired, the matter between us remains unresolved." "Are you all right, Lenny?" I said, my tone gentle. However, attempting to comprehend the distance that had abruptly emerged, I required clarification regarding what transpired between us. Contemplating the rationale of the space between us seems to expand significantly with each passing instant. He offered a slight, nearly disdainful. He shrugged, his words scarcely audible, clearly discernible as he responded, "Yes, I am well." I simply did not anticipate Mark to appear, that was all. His words lingered. They were present, however, they appeared to lack explanation. All occurrences transpiring underneath, I intended to contact the surface. Further elucidation is required to comprehend the reasons behind this sensation, dissimilar, however, prior to my ability to articulate additional. He pivoted and proceeded by me. Proceeding to his chamber without hesitation, provide me with another glimpse. The quiet between us was overwhelming. Gentle click of the door shutting behind. That seemed like the ultimate seal on the conversation that had scarcely begun. Remained momentarily immobilized. Location, inundated by an unusual amalgamation of relief, bewilderment, and an unpleasant sensation that a significant matter had been omitted and remarked. I discovered myself gazing at the door to Lenny's room was closed, affecting my heart burdened with an overwhelming sense of loss. I was unable to eloquently articulate it. It resembled. A change had occurred between us, an unarticulated tension that permeated the atmosphere, like to a cloud poised to release its contents. My mind recounted everything as it had transpired. Although previously intimate, the nuanced manner of the gaze remained fixed when Mark was present, the unmistakable strain that existed, submerged close below the surface. Menacingly poised to escape, I proceeded along, entered my private chamber, and collapsed on the edge of the bed. My mind were racing, endeavored to comprehend all that had transpired. It just occurred. I was aware that I was unable to. Disregard it indefinitely, as it will inevitably resurface. We would have to confront whatever it was that was altering between us. However, I was uncertain about how to commence or where to begin. Commence intertwining this intricate web of emotions. As I was engrossed in contemplation, I heard a gentle rap at my door, caused my heart to flutter, the pulse of unexpected hope igniting within me. Perhaps it was Lenny's comeback. I called, "Come in," with my voice. More stable than I perceived, the door creaked open, and there he stood in the threshold, exhibiting an inscrutable countenance. I had become so familiar that he stepped in and seated himself next me on the bed. Hands clasped in his lap, his gaze unwavering. The hush between him and Lenny diminished, disrupts the pervasive silence, and burdensome, as though laden with the weight of all things. The unexpressed burden was overwhelming at that moment. Seemed nearly stifling, but paradoxically. Ultimately, Lenny broke the necessary. His voice was scarcely audible, a mere whisper. "Mother, He commenced his speech with hesitation, as though he was selecting each one meticulously. I am uncertain about the situation. I apologize if I created an awkward situation earlier. I simply... He faltered, the words seemingly ensnared. His throat conveyed his irritation clearly as he endeavored to express the sentiments he was unable to articulate my thoughts. I made contact and rested my hand on his, providing a silent reassurance by a soft hug that conveyed more than words could express. Lenny. It's all right, I responded gently. Constant, despite the ambiguity that entwined within me, we are both but possibilities. We are both experiencing a sense of disorientation at present. It has been solely the two of us for some time. Protracted and occasionally circumstances become. It is acceptable to experience confusion. He nodded slowly, his gaze remaining fixed. With a distant gaze in his eyes, his stare has a profound weight and depth of sentiment that caused my heart to throb at that moment. After what appeared to be an interminable duration, he raised his eyes to meet my gaze, was imbued with certain Annie feelings, uncertainty, frustration, and longing, an additional matter that I did not fully comprehend. It was named yet? It seemed dissimilar. It was not. Merely the customary exasperation or perplexity. There was an additional presence. Untamed and unarticulated, I was uncertain how to proceed. I mumbled a response, his voice barely audible, that I nearly overlooked the. It seemed as though he was apprehensive to acknowledge, yet apprehensive to face any challenges, had been developing between us. The vulnerability in his words affected me more profoundly than I anticipated, and at that point, comprehended the extent of this situation. It was impacting him as well. I could sense the burden of my own heart's anguish reaction to the bewilderment in his gaze. For a little instant, the impulse to extend and embracing him closely overpowered me with want. To embrace him and convey to him all things would be, reassure him that we can successfully collaboratively navigate this. However, I hesitated, uncertain whether that would genuinely assist or if it would further aggravate the situation. The requirements were ambiguous, and I was uncertain if my impulse to provide him comfort was correct. Duration of? I refrained from taking action and remained motionless instead, permitting the profound silence between us to actions convey meaning more effectively than words. I remained seated, experiencing the burden of the unarticulated anticipation for the opportune moment, uncertain on how to interrupt the silence, ultimately following what seemed like an eternity. I inhaled deeply while observing. I turned to face him and gazed into his eyes, seeking any indication of his emotions and potential needs from Melanie. Perhaps we should reconsider our approach and really contemplate all that. I exhaled gently, attempting to identify the appropriate words that achieve the appropriate equilibrium between assurance and comprehending that it is acceptable to experience intimacy towards one another, although it is also acceptable to require space designated for your organization. Unnecessary thoughts. We need not entertain all matters resolved at this instant. He nodded slowly, as though the burden of the words were resonating. But then in an unanticipated motion that surprised me, the guard rested his head on my shoulder. It was a gesture that promptly captivated, reminiscent of his youth when he frequently sought solace, in that it felt warm and calming in a familiar manner. However, there was an element of distinction regarding. There was now an underlying tension beneath the surface that I could not overlook. A silent acknowledgement that the dynamics between us had altered in manners we had not completely comprehended. But my heart was touched by the unconsciously. I enveloped my encircling him with one arm, drawing him near in a manner that was both safeguarding and reassuring. It was an embrace that provided security. despite my familiarity with the questions remaining in a state of indecision. Since we were distant from achieving clarity, responded that there was an abundance of unarticulated sentiments, a multitude of feelings we had not completely digested. However, at that moment, I recognized that perhaps we did not require all the answers. At present, we might go incrementally, collaboratively resolve the issue regardless of the circumstances. The route ahead appeared ambiguous and complex. As we remained seated grasping on, I experienced a profound sense of tranquility. A serene tranquility enveloped me. It was gentle and articulated optimism that persisted in the atmosphere regardless of the challenges we encountered. Regardless of how challenging circumstances may appear, we can still discover a solution to this predicament. We remained in such position for a duration, enveloped in a concept of quiet, the proximity between us providing a transitory impression of tranquility. At that time it seemed as if the bewilderment, the intricacy of our circumstances may disintegrate only by proximity. However, I was acutely aware that it was not the case. The simplicity of his presence's comfort was indisputable, yet underlying that warmth there was a pervasive sense of anxiety neither of us could completely dispel. After a period, Lenny withdrew slightly, elevating his head and locking eyes with me. This face conveyed a serious earnestness, altered the comfort of the present method for a grave intensity mother. I am uncertain about my course of action. Amidst these emotions, he spoke softly, his voice imbued with I wish to avoid creating ambiguity, becoming challenging between us. However, I cannot simply disregard it, as his words persisted in the atmosphere, laden with unarticulated stress. A question for which he lacked the audacity to articulate the burden of. The quiet weighed heavily upon me, and his struggled intensely, my thoughts rushing in chaotic circles. While I hurried to locate the appropriate, I began to speak, but before I could utter a word, one could articulate anything, another arrived. A tap at the door startled us both, sound shocked by Ray's interference, capturing astonishment and ambiguity. The knock was strong and deliberate, almost as if the individual and the opposing party perceived something was amiss and required resolution. Overcoming whatever impediment existed between us, a surge of anxious energy enveloped. I stood up impulsively, approached the door. Upon opening it, Mark was once again standing there. His countenance darkened with apprehension, as if he had been contemplating a significant burden. His maniacal tone was evident in his voice. Authentic concern. I apologize for the interruption. I wanted to verify if everything was in order. You appeared quite unusual earlier, and I wanted to confirm your well-being. Paused briefly before casting a glance, I gestured towards Lenny, who was observing us. His expression remained inscrutable between us, laden with unexpressed. I inhaled deeply, while attempting to address the queries. Stabilize my voice, despite its quiver. He responded with a little acknowledgement, saying, "Thank you, Mark. We are content with a tranquil evening." Mark directed a prolonged scrutinizing gaze at me, then directed his glance towards Lenny. His eyes remained pensive, regarding him. He nodded after inquiring before returning to me. Gradually, however, an element in his demeanor implied he was not entirely persuaded by all. He softened his tone, stating, "Right?" Softening. "Just remember I am next door if needed. If you require anything, do not hesitate to ask him." I turned and exited, closing the door behind me. Soft click, and rested on it for a. At that moment, I collected my thoughts and turned, returning to Lenny, who remained standing. They observed me with an intensity that Madame the skin prickled. His eyes appeared to penetrate me in pursuit of possibly something pertaining to the truth. After an extended moment, he stood with reassurance. His action was slow and deliberate. I sensed my heart accelerate momentarily. Once more, the atmosphere between us felt oppressive, dense, with all the elements neither of us boldly asserted that he approached near, and I prepared myself for any forthcoming words approached next. But upon reaching me, he halted his expression from changing as if he were contending with some internal. Perhaps we should refrain from exerting pressure. This mother, he stated, his voice subdued, somewhat trembling. Perhaps we require. It is time to contemplate. His comments impacted me profoundly. I waved and nodded, my heart breaking. Harboring the same ambivalent emotions he must have felt, that I comprehended the requirement for space to contemplate matters, I responded, "Absolutely correct, Lenny." Gently, my voice laden with anticipation, "All things. It remains unarticulated that we both require contemplation. We cannot expedite this." Lenny nodded in concurrence, and we remained there. In stillness, our closeness is peculiar. A mix of intimacy and remoteness, as though we were on the verge of something we was unable to completely comprehend. Or it felt like a conclusion, yet also a continuation. The commencement of a novel endeavor we were unable to define as he. I proceeded carefully to his room while remaining behind, immobilized, contemplating what the future has in store for us, and if we could identify a path ahead. Thank you for remaining together or apart, accompanying us to the conclusion prior to our statement. Farewell. If you have not yet subscribed, I encourage you to activate the subscription button. Your assistance, even if it appears to be a minor gesture, holds significant value for us, motivates us to persist in content creation. With heart, do not neglect to provide it. If you appreciated our sharing today, please indicate your approval. Each connection contributes to our development and enables us to maintain connections with. Thank you for sharing significant narratives. Thank you for your participation in this community.